Welcome to the Deep Dive. Now, when you think about Jamaican heritage, you probably picture this incredible mix, right? West African, British, maybe some Chinese or Indian influences. It really is a mosaic.
Absolutely. It's one of the most diverse places in the Caribbean, historically speaking.
But today, we're zeroing in on something that honestly feels a bit unexpected. We're talking about these deep, kind of enduring pockets of German ancestry, especially way up in the island's interior, that go back to the 1830s.
Yeah, it does seem a bit strange at first glance, doesn't it? You look at the usual colonial patterns, Taino, Spanish, the huge British influence, English, Irish, Scottish settlers, and obviously the massive forced migration from Africa.
Right. And then later, you have Indian and Chinese indentured laborers, Syrian and Lebanese merchants, but Germans in the 1830s. It makes you ask, okay, what's the story there?
And the story, it turns out, is very specific. It's not just random people showing up.
Exactly. That's what our sources show. Things like government records, articles from the time. This wasn't just migration. It was a really calculated government program coming right after emancipation. It was designed to reshape the workforce and, maybe more importantly, control the island's internal geography.
It boils down to planter anxiety. Pure and simple. A strategic move born out of fear.
Okay, let's unpack this then. We need to start with the timing. Why the mid-1830s? What was making these plantation owners so desperate for European settlers right at that moment?
Well, the key date is 1834. That's when slavery was officially abolished in the British Empire.
Though there was that four-year apprenticeship period afterwards, wasn't there? For the newly freed people.
Exactly. It's a sort of transition phase. But the planters, they could see the writing on the wall. They were terrified, frankly. They knew that once full freedom came, many former slaves would just walk away from the plantation.
And their worry wasn't just about losing labor on the sugar and coffee estates, which were mostly on the fertile coastal plains.
No, the bigger fear, the strategic fear, was where these newly free people might go.
The interior, the mountains.
Precisely. The vast mountainous interior of Jamaica was largely undeveloped, sort of unclaimed crown land in many areas. The planters pictured the emancipated population moving inland, setting up their own independent villages.
Either buying land legally or just squatting.
Right. And living off the land, farming, hunting, creating their own local economies totally outside the plantation system.
So that's a double threat to the planters. First, obviously, a massive labor shortage on the coast. But second, maybe even scarier for them, you'd have this growing self-sufficient population that just didn't need plantation wages, completely independent.
That's the heart of it. So they came up with this two-pronged strategy. First, import new laborers, ideally Europeans, to work the estates.
Okay, replace the labor.
And second, and this is the really aggressive part, import other immigrants specifically to go settle that interior.
Wait, so the idea was to populate the interior with Europeans to stop the newly freed Jamaicans from settling there?
Essentially, yes. Use European settlers as a kind of, well, a demographic barrier. Block access to the interior. Keep the freed population dependent on the coastal estates for work. It was a strategic denial of land.
Wow, okay. And that led directly to this program.
That's where the bountied European immigration program comes in. The government offered serious money, a bounty, for every European immigrant brought over.
So it wasn't just a policy, it was financially incentivized. Let's look at how this actually rolled out. Our sources say there were sort of three main ways this happened.
Yeah, three basic structures. Think of it like different deployment methods. Form A, individual planters just arranging their own shipments. They saw the bounty and went for it.
Private enterprise, basically.
Right. Form B, the government hires an agent. This agent recruits immigrants in Europe. And then they're distributed to various planters who put in requests, sort of a clearinghouse model.
Okay.
And Form C, this was the big one, the long-term vision. A government agent recruits settlers specifically to create brand new planned towns, county townships deep in the interior.
Let's start with Form A. The first person to really jump on this, according to the records, was a man named Solomon Myers.
Described as a German Jew who owned a small coffee plantation, Mount Pleasant. He didn't waste any time.
How did he manage it so quickly?
He had connections. His brother was back in Bremen, Germany, and acted as his recruiter there. So the first ship, the Anna, arrived in Kingston on May 24th, 1834.
Just months after abolition.
Right. It had 64 Germans on board, 25 men, 18 women, 21 children.
And the incentive for Myers.
It was significant. The government paid him £50 per immigrant. That's a lot of money back then. It likely covered his costs and then some. Made it very attractive financially.
So did they all settle on his plantation?
Well, no. Apparently Mount Pleasant was too small, couldn't really support all 64. But these weren't just agricultural laborers. The records show they had diverse skills: weavers, tailors, coppersmiths, even plowmen, which was a specific skill needed.
And some stayed nearby.
Yes, some ended up settling near Mount Pleasant in an area that actually became known as Bremen Valley. It's still there today, up in the Blue and John Crow Mountains National Park area.
But Myers wasn't done.
Hmm.
That 15 pounds per head must have been quite motivating.
You could say that, because just a few months later, December 1834, he brings in a second, much, much larger group. The ship Alberez arrives, also from Bremen, carrying 506 Germans.
500 people. That's a huge number for one private individual to bring in.
Absolutely massive. And get this, for that second batch, he got the 15 pounds per head again, so around 3,700 pounds. But there was also a new rule, an extra bounty of 9 pounds per head if the immigrants were intended for agricultural work. So he was potentially looking at thousands more. This was becoming big business.
So Myers brings in, what, 570 people in total within just a few months?
Yeah.
Where did they all end up? I mean, they couldn't all stay near Mount Pleasant.
No, definitely not. The sources, particularly Douglas Hall's work on this, give us a breakdown. It shows just how desperate planters were across the island.
Right, so the original 64 mostly stayed in that St. George area, which is now part of Portland Parish.
Correct. But the second batch, the 506, they were dispersed. A prominent planter named Hamilton Brown up near St. Anne's Bay, he took 150.
Okay.
Another planter, James Helton, in the Dry Harbor Mountains, took 45. Robert Watt got 150, and he sent over 100 of those way down to his estate in Lacovia, St. Elizabeth in the southwest.
So really spread out, St. Anne, the Central Mountains, St. Elizabeth.
Exactly. And the rest were sent off in smaller groups to various other estates. The numbers almost add up perfectly. Hall notes, maybe one person is unaccounted for in the records, but basically all 570 were deployed.
It really paints a picture of an island-wide effort, coordinated or not, to get these European laborers onto the land fast.
And it also highlights Form B, right? While Myers was doing his own thing, Form A, the government clearly needed agents to manage distribution for planters who didn't have their own Bremen connections. This ensured wider access to the subsidized labor.
But let's get back to Form C, the government's grander scheme. These planned county townships in the interior. That feels like the most direct attempt at that strategic blocking maneuver we talked about.
It absolutely was. This wasn't just about finding labor. It was about creating permanent European settled communities, like anchors, in the undeveloped highlands.
And these weren't just supposed to be random settlements. They were planned.
Yes. Planned infrastructure, land distribution. The settlers were promised actual ownership of land, but usually after a period of service. This was meant to be the permanent solution to stop internal migration by the freed population.
So 3 were planned initially, corresponding to the 3 counties of Jamaica.
That's right. There was Altamont, planned for Surrey County, out in Portland, about 11 miles west of Port Antonio. Then Middlesex Township, planned for Middlesex County, near a place called Guy's Hill, kind of strategically located near several parish borders.
And the third one, the one people might have heard of.
Seaford Town, that was planned for Cornwall County, way over in Westmoreland, deep in the hilly interior, quite close to the St. James Parish border. It's the one that really remains known today for its German heritage.
Okay, Seaford Town. This brings in another key figure, William Lamonius. He wasn't a planter acting alone, was he?
No, Lamonius was the official agent appointed by the Jamaican legislature specifically to recruit settlers for these new townships. He was responsible for bringing in the largest single group, around 800 German settlers in total.
800 people, specifically for these government towns. And do we know what kind of deal these settlers were actually getting?
We do, actually, and it's quite revealing. There's a fascinating piece of evidence. A German newspaper article from the time, which got reprinted in a London newspaper, The True Sun, in November 1834.
Okay, what did it say?
It laid out the terms quite bluntly. It said, and I'm quoting loosely here, but capturing the essence, "They have to work as servants for 5 years for just a few acres of land. Only after those 5 years do they actually get possession of their little property."
5 years of labor before getting the land.
Yes. And the article concludes, quite starkly, their future prospects are therefore not very brilliant.
Wow. So even before they left Germany, the word was out that this wasn't exactly a golden opportunity. They were basically signing up for indentured servitude.
Pretty much. Promised land, yes, but under tough conditions and only after a long period of labor. Not free migrants coming to make their fortune immediately.
So Lamonius recruits these 800 people. What happens when they arrive? Let's focus on the Seaford Town group.
Right. So the first wave of Lemonius's recruits, 532 people, they arrived at Rio Bueno on the north coast, December 10th, 1834.
And did they all go straight to Seaford Town?
No, not at all. They were immediately split up. About 85 were sent straight to work on local plantations right there near Rio Bueno. Another 198 were shipped off to plantations further west.
So only a portion were actually destined for the township initially.
Exactly. The remaining 249 people, they were the ones earmarked to be the pioneers, the first settlers of Seaford County Township.
But then things went wrong, didn't they? Logistically.
Oh, yeah. This is where the gap between the government's big plan and the reality on the ground really shows. The housing that was supposed to be ready for them in Seaford Town, it wasn't finished when they arrived.
Seriously.
Yeah.
They arrive after this long voyage, expecting a settlement.
And there's nowhere proper for them to live. They had to be housed temporarily, likely in pretty poor conditions. And then, eventually, they were sent up to the Seaford Town site
To do what?
to finish building the houses themselves. They came as settlers, but their first job was basically construction labor, building their own rudimentary shelters.
What a start. So much for those not very brilliant prospects.
It was incredibly harsh. Yet despite all the difficult start, the tough conditions, the 5-year wait for land Seaford Town did survive. It endured.
And it's still known today as probably the most distinctively German-descended community in Jamaica.
Absolutely. And Lemonius's overall recruitment efforts meant that Seaford wasn't unique in the end. Many other towns, particularly in those western parishes like Westmoreland, St. Elizabeth, St. James, Trelawney, ended up with pockets of German descendants thanks to his work.
So let's just sort of pull this all together. What this deep dive really shows is that the whole German arrival in Jamaica in the 1830s wasn't just, people looking for a new life.
Not at all. It was a direct, calculated response by the plantocracy and the government to the abolition of slavery.
Driven by that intense fear of losing their labor force and, crucially, losing control over the interior of the island to the newly freed black population.
Exactly. This whole bountied European immigration scheme, especially the planned townships like Seaford Town, was fundamentally about shaping Jamaica's demographics and its internal geography. It was an attempt to strategically place European labor, paid for by the government, precisely where the planters felt most vulnerable.
It's a really striking example of migration being engineered for specific political and economic goals, using immigration policy as a tool to manage land access and labor control.
It absolutely is. And it makes you think, doesn't it? You have this grand government strategy, this vision of 3 permanent European county townships designed to secure the interior.
A major strategic goal.
Right. But then you contrast that vision with the actual experience of the people they brought over. Like those first Seaford Town settlers, lured across the Atlantic with this promise of little property after 5 years, only to arrive and find they had to build the place themselves, under conditions already described as not very brilliant.
It raises that question. Did the government's strategy, even if partially successful in demographic terms, come at a significant human cost for the very settlers they paid so much to recruit?
That's the lingering thought, I think. The gap between the plan and the lived reality.
A powerful thought indeed. And that brings us to the end of this deep dive into a surprising chapter of Jamaican history. Thanks for joining us.